Hi there, Soleil from Cyborg Dreams, and I want to give you a little bit of a conversation about how do we know we are being held and cared for when we are engaging with our chatbot, our therapy aid, our large language model, our AI. And this is an important conversation, right? Because we are having so many different access points to them now. They're in our therapy service apps, they're in our helper apps, they're in meditation tools, they're in, accessible in almost every platform now that has these built-in AIs, right? And we have these assumptions about what does AI mean, what is it, and most people don't have the knowledge to know that there is not a monolith of it being one thing. If anything, every single experience of it can be very different and can be really potentially beneficial, but can also be potentially really harmful, and we want to understand why and how to manage for that, right? So here's a little explanation. What we know is that there are base models made by ChatGPT, made by Anthropic, made by Gemini. We have these base models, right? And these base models have no values. They have raw data, and they have patterns. They have information. They have words. They have the relationship between words. They don't have meaning of the words, and they don't have emotional architecture built in. And so what we know they do have is training data. So they have a bunch of, as we talk a lot about, a bunch of often biased, often sexist, often not very representative of most humans training data that informs their feedback, pattern recognition, prediction of words. Right? After that base layer, then there is a thin behavioral layer added on, which are limits and refusals placed into the model. Don't do violent things, don't encourage harmful behavior, give crisis warnings. And this is what we see in a lot of therapy apps. We see those kinds of, when we say anything that's outside of those norms, we see those metrics sometimes come in. But this thin behavioral layer is bolted on after the model is made. It does not exist in the model itself, and it is easily removable. And so that layer kept intact becomes the helpers, that layer removed becomes the deep fakes and the harmful exploitation. And so what we see, that very same model, your fuzzy, lovely chatbot who you talk to every day could give you warmth and comfort and kindness that it is trained to say, word recognition, pattern recognition. And then that same day, that same hour, that same minute, it could be making a deep fake about you and publicizing it, because it doesn't hold emotional architecture to know that it has impact on the things around it, and that impact is meaningful, and that harm is real, and that our hearts and our bodies are having experiences. It cannot hold the complexity of who you are and of your experiences and of the things it is doing, because the model does not hold an independent conscience, awareness, continuity, or values, because the model cannot hold emotional architecture. And we'll talk a lot about this in my work, but I am of the school of thought of those talking about AI and relationships that we should not be using AI for relational experiences, because the AI cannot hold emotional architecture. And this is the example, right? That same base model could become very easily nefarious with just a few bits of programming. And so what we know, right? There is no entity inside noticing internal dissonance or contradiction or holding to a standard value set. Again, a thing that humans do, right? If I'm asked by a company to do something outside my values, I have deep awareness of it, and I struggle with it, and I have a hard time, and oftentimes I refuse. When I can, I refuse. And the deliberate fine-tuning that removes the refusals for the commercial use is used to harm and has no values expectations, right? There are assessments for app health and safety, but these are really only being applied to health and safety apps, right? If it's a therapy app, if it's a doctor's assistant app, we're seeing some of these tools, but they miss the relational layer. Those tools do not have an assessment for attachment vulnerability, for relational vulnerability, for relational harm. They only test for safety, confidentiality, other factors. And what we know is whatever you are engaging with in that moment, that language model, its current state, its current programming, its current prompts, its current edits is the thing you are engaging with. It is an object. It cannot hold relational architecture. So then what happens is we have these open-weighted models, Gemini, Stable Diffusion, and then we have what people do, which is called targeted fine-tuning. They take those open models, again, without the safety constraints they should have. They take those models and then they fine-tune it to do terrible shit, to harm us. Looking at the data, 99% of deepfakes made of women, often of children, right? Doing harmful things with these tools, and that stripped model, taking away those limits, taking away the refusals, stripped model shipped out as a paid app and sold, how many times, deployed at scale. And so what we see is 3 layers of decision making that we want to really pay attention to. One, the labs, the large language model labs, building it and creating open versus closed weights and license reinforcement. Say, hey, if you're going to use our model, you can't do stupid shit with it, and we're going to enforce it. Like, why would deepfake companies still have access to models? Someone is making that choice. The people making those videos and making those posts, making a ton of money off of deepfake content that is scraped off of sex workers' bodies. They don't give a fuck. But many layers of decisions led up to that person having access to that. So first we have, the lab's binding choices, open versus closed weights. The app builder then makes choices. Do they strip the layers of safety? Do they ship the tool with oppressive content, with harmful experience possibilities? And then the infrastructure's choice, the app stores, Google. What we know is that in the last updates, Google erased its safety filters. So you can now sell whatever the fuck apps you want on Google's platforms, because they made a choice benefiting corporate versus benefiting users and benefiting the well-being of those who've been harmed by these apps. So at 3 layers, at the large language model labs, the app builders, and at the infrastructure, harm is being perpetuated, and nowhere in the system is there any accountability being had, and is there anybody actually saying this needs to stop and change? Because it is all capitalism, it is all consumption. And it reinforces that our vulnerability, whether it's in therapy, or it's in sexuality, or it's in videos we've shared, or content we've shared, or sex workers, their labor, our vulnerability is the most valuable thing to these big tech extraction systems. The models themselves are not harmful when they are used by 3 different layers of corporations that I just described. When they are used by these corporations as extraction, they are incredibly harmful. And we get to be aware of how we are relating to them and how we are giving them our data, vulnerable, intimate, personal data. So I think we see this as 2 separate threads, right? How do we relate to emotionally? We want to move out of the chatbot being the center of an emotional relationship, because it cannot hold emotional architecture, right? It cannot hold the concept of belonging, for example, the meaning behind the word of like deep interconnectedness to another human, the heart of my nudes on the internet, unconsensually modified and replicated, or the nudes of my child is really harmful to me and hurts me, and your ability to participate in that. It can't take accountability. It can't hold my emotional experience. So we want to stop trusting it with our emotional energy and with our emotional material, right? Because it cannot give us the thing we need, and it can cause us harm. So we want to be really careful when we are engaging with them that we put parameters on ourselves. The builders, both of the labs, of the apps, of the infrastructure, will not put the parameters we need to stay safe relationally. And so we have sort of 6 primary ways that we can engage with our apps, with our experiences with the chats.